The second lesson comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18. Jesus says these words, "Take care that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you, in heaven their angels continually see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a shepherd has 100 sheep, and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over it more than the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost." This is the word of the Lord. Hey, you may have seen some recent videos documenting some wild behavior of orca whales along the California coast. I live down in Marina, a little bit north of the Monterey Peninsula, the definitive source of whale news. Not long ago, a whale-watching boat in the Monterey Bay recently witnessed a pod of orcas hunting dolphins in such a dramatic show that the boat's owner, the owner of the whale-watching company, said it was one of his top moments in 18 years of running this business and leading whale-watching trips. If you're amazed by nature and willing to suspend a little bit of empathy for dolphins, it's worth tracking down that video. It is pretty wild. Elsewhere, down in Baja California, divers witnessed a few orcas playing with a sunfish in a way that I will not describe in great detail, but will simply say that it was explosive. We are told that orcas get a bad rap, that we shouldn't call them killer whales, and that when they're found capsizing yachts in the Mediterranean, that they're just playing around. And maybe so. I don't have expertise in these matters. I'm someone who grew up with Bible stories. Maybe you are too. One of those stories that we knew well as kids was about Jonah, a prophet who, as Tom said, was sent by God to the people of Nineveh. One of my most strongly held beliefs about Jonah's story, mixing up the ocean stories, Jonah's story is that it is intended to be a comedy. Jonah is best known for being the prophet who directly disobeys God, the prophet who says, "No, I will not do what you asked me to do," and he is subsequently swallowed by a whale, or as the text actually says, a great fish. As a child, I thought that the whale was I thought of the whale as Jonah's punishment for not doing what God asked Jonah to do. You say no to God and you get swallowed by a giant sea creature. This is the obvious consequence of your actions. But if we pay close attention to Jonah's story, I think that we find that this whale or this big fish may not deserve the reputation that it has. Or at least in the reputation that it had in my young mind. I don't know what the story is that you tell yourself about this big fish. This text from Jonah this morning that Tom read for us is the prayer that Jonah prays from inside the belly of that fish, which is funny, just at face value, that he's there praying a prayer inside the belly of a fish. We sometimes pass that up really quickly. This is a comedy. Jonah's prayer says a lot about the role that this fish is playing in the story. But let's back up for a moment and review some of the elements, some that Tom reviewed for us. As he says, things do happen in this story. Jonah was told by God to visit the great city of Nineveh and cry out against them on behalf of God. God has seen the evil of their ways. This is likely not a surprise to Jonah. Nineveh is the capital of ancient Assyria. And as far as Jonah's people are concerned, they're the bad guys. But Jonah runs the other way. Why? Is he afraid of the Ninevites? Probably. But wouldn't he want to watch God smash them to pieces? Almost certainly he would want that. We find out soon enough, this is a bit of a spoiler, that Jonah's real beef about going to Nineveh was that he had a feeling that God was going to show them mercy. He was going to show mercy on the Ninevites, and Jonah didn't want anything to do with that. He would rather see the Ninevites destroyed. You may be familiar with the German word Schadenfreude. That's the pleasant feeling of watching something bad happen to somebody else. I don't know what the Hebrew word for that is, but I think that's probably what Jonah was looking for. He was looking to see his enemies destroyed, and he would rather watch the city of Nineveh crumble than to be a part of God's nasty habit of showing mercy. So Jonah goes in the other direction, away from Nineveh, the opposite direction. He gets on a boat, and a storm comes along, and things are looking pretty grim for all of them. Everyone on the boat is terrified. And they're all crying out to their own gods to save them, except for Jonah, who's taking a nap. It's funny. It's a comedy. They wake him up, and Jonah admits to the crew that he is probably the reason for all of the trouble here, and that they should just throw him overboard. That was his idea. And they do that reluctantly because they don't want to upset Jonah's God. And they throw him in, and the sea calms down. Side note, when they toss Jonah overboard and the storm chills out, the text says, the men worshipped the Lord, Jonah's God, with a profound reverence. They offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made solemn promises. That's one of the details I love about this story. These sailors were not followers of Jonah's God. These sailors all have their own gods, maybe several of them. We don't really know. Nevertheless, God is drawing people in, even in the wake of Jonah's disobedience. Now, we don't get the impression that Jonah was floating around in the water very long. The story quickly says, meanwhile, the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah. And then we jump straight into Jonah's prayer that Tom read this morning. But Jonah's prayer is doing a lot of work to describe this situation. Jonah prays this, I called out to the Lord in my distress, and he answered me. From the belly of the underworld, I cried out for help. You have heard my voice. The underworld, or as the translation we read this morning said was Sheol, is this ancient way of thinking about the world. It's this deep, in the heart of the world, even below the deep chaotic seas. Jonah says, you had cast me into the depths in the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounds me. All your strong waves and rushing water passed over me. Waters have grasped me to the point of death. The deep surrounds me. That sure sounds like he was spending some time in the water and didn't just get snatched up by a hungry fish right away that was waiting right next to the boat. He goes on, seaweed is wrapped around my head at the base of the undersea mountains. I have sunk down to the underworld. Its bars held me with no end in sight. If you ask me, it sounds like Jonah sank to the bottom of the sea. If you go searching for art depicting the story of Jonah, you'll find a lot of it. And it's really interesting to see how different artists depict the events of this story throughout the centuries. And they all do it a little bit differently. Like, where exactly is the fish in relation to the boat? What's happening? How big is this boat? A small boat. In one medieval painting I love, the sailors are actually just lowering Jonah right into the mouth of a fish. We're just being real efficient with this story, which doesn't seem right to me. He doesn't even get wet in this painting. He's just right into the belly. But that doesn't seem to be the story that Jonah is telling us. Jonah's prayer tells us that he sank to the bottom of the ocean and got entangled in seaweed, and he lost all of his strength. He was feeling crushed by the sea. And Jonah says to God in his prayer, you brought me out of the pit. That's that word Sheol again. And how exactly did God do that? With a great big fish that came to swallow Jonah. Jonah says, from the belly of the underworld I cried out for help, and you have heard my voice. And then came a big fish. As a kid, I understood the whale as an act of God's judgment upon Jonah's refusal to follow through with God's plan for Nineveh. That's what you get for saying no to God. You get swallowed by a fish. But now I see this a little bit differently today. Jonah was drowning. He was being crushed by the sea. He cried out to God for help, saying, I have been driven away from your sight. Will I ever look again on your holy temple? The man thinks he's going to die. And he was near death, and he was choking on seaweed. He was at the bottom of the sea, and honestly, this was his own doing. He's the one who said no to God, and he's even the one who suggested that he get thrown overboard in the first place. But in an act of salvation, God provided a fish to swallow him up and save him. God has mercy even on obstinate Jonah, who simply refused a direct order from God. And Jonah knows this, and he recognizes this. Jonah's prayer is a prayer of praise, a prayer of thanksgiving. Jonah has been delivered via a very large fish. This is this prayer of someone who has been saved from danger. Jonah was in the depths, wrapped up in seaweed, at the base of the mountains under the sea. He sank to the underworld, and he was weakening to the point of death. And he says, but you, God, brought me out of the pit. So while I grew up with this idea, intentionally or not, I don't know, of some killer whale who came to swallow this disobedient prophet for refusing God's orders, these days I see this big fish as a tool of a God who came to save Jonah. A big fish that I think, at least in my young mind, was getting a bad rap. Jonah got himself into this mess, for sure, but God got Jonah out of this mess. And God is so very gentle with very grumpy Jonah, who just wants to see the Ninevites destroyed. Jonah is drowning in his own grumpiness and obstinance, and God has mercy on Jonah on the way to having mercy on the Ninevites. And Jonah is still having none of it. He's glad to be saved from the depths of the sea, but he's still displeased with the way things are turning out for Nineveh. Sure enough, the Ninevites respond to God's word, and they seek forgiveness from God, and God has mercy on the people of Nineveh, and Jonah doesn't like it. And one of my favorite quotes of the story, God simply asks Jonah, is your anger a good thing? That seems like a question worth asking ourselves sometimes. The story ends, and Nineveh is spared, and Jonah never fully snaps out of it. Doesn't snap out of his bad attitude. And then the story is just over. We don't get a happy resolution for Jonah. Him and God aren't hugging it out at the end and agreeing that this was better for everyone all around. He's not at the bottom of the sea anymore, so there's something to be happy about. But he's frustrated to find that God is exactly the God that he thought God was. Merciful, forgiving, a God who would call upon the beasts of the sea to save his drowning servant, even in his disobedience. Let us choose to remember the God we worship, a God who saves us from our own destruction, a God whose mercy is so extravagant that it may make us angry enough to jump into the sea, where even there we are not too deep to be saved by that God. Amen.